Hello, this is your host Akhil Lavluri, and welcome to the brand new episode of the Techospace podcast series. In this podcast episode, I'm honored and thrilled to welcome one of the most eminent and prominent industry leaders of the IT industry, and as well as the enterprise architecture space, Mr. Michael D. Stark, who happens to be the enterprise architect of the company Tower Insurance, and also is the author of the creative book Surviving Strategy and Architecture, and he's based out of Christchurch, Canterbury, New Zealand. Michael, it gives me an absolute pleasure to welcome you to this initiative of mine. So, Michael, how are you doing, and how was your weekend like? How did it go like? Totally.
I had a great weekend. I was out of town. Hey, thank you for having me along, Akhil, and namaste. It's an honor to be here on your podcast. So thank you very much. I really support what you're trying to do here. We need more of this out there in the architecture community and technology community. So yeah, it's a very windy week here in Canterbury and Christchurch, and we're in spring, and so it's quite nice. Yeah, absolutely.
That's lovely to hear, Michael. So,
Okay.
without further ado, let's start and let's proceed with our podcast session. All right, Michael. So, let's talk about the inception of your journey in the IT industry.
Okay, so I didn't go straight into IT, and I think for me it's really important where I came from. So my formative background was very much in a lower socioeconomic demographic in Christchurch. My school years, I was at a pretty tough school, and my school years were very much around trying to survive rather than trying to learn. To be honest, as a card-carrying introvert, that was pretty tough at a tough school. And then I moved into a number of different labouring jobs and construction, bit of truck driving, and that didn't really do it for me. So in my early 20s, I moved back into tertiary education and tried a few different things, but IT clicked pretty quickly. It really worked for me. So that background, I think, coming from lower socioeconomic and having to, experience a few different things and some manual labour work, I think it's been really good for grounding me through my career. So I have a real appreciation, as many of us do, of the people that are out there doing the real work. And for those of us in IT and technology, we're very lucky that we get to make a really good living in a dry, warm, typically physically safe. Politics can be a bit nasty, but we're physically safe environment. And that's something for us to always remember. Also, in terms of my background, I've had lots of different interests, and I've definitely gone through the world of the ultra capitalist Ayn Rand type people, right through to the ultra socialist Noam Chomsky type people, and everything in between. So, as well as my IT career, I also have a very keen interest in the social aspect and the economic aspect as well. So, yeah, I did my tertiary education for a number of years, and then I moved into doing corporate IT training, because I thought that would allow me to hone my skills around presentation in front of people, and I thought that was really important. And then quickly gravitated towards data, particularly relational database modeling, DBA, data migration, data strategy work, data governance work, data warehousing. I did a bit of a detour into SAP ABAP programming and a bit of Cold Fusion web development, but a lot of it was around data. Finally moving through into some solution architect on a ERP type implementation. And then in the mid-teens,
Mhm.
I got an opportunity to move into a EA focus, and moving to that enterprise architecture level of abstraction was something that I found fit very well with me. I was an okay solution architect, not great. I was an okay DBA, but enterprise architecture really works at broad focus, high level of abstraction, looking for linkages through to strategy. Um, a large chunk of my career was spent at one company for 23 years. Um, Although the company changed over those 23 years from a mutual to a New Zealand-based company to an international-based company. And so we went from very small teams into a large multinational centralized IT operating model. So as an enterprise architect in a team of about 100 architects and
Okay.
3,000 IT people. So in a weird way, I've got lots of experience at different companies within the IT industry, technically one company, but it changed around me. So I got a lot of experience. And maybe just to wrap that up in terms of how I got to where I got to, probably one of my favorite quotes to describe architecture would actually be from an economist called Thomas Sowell. And his quote is, "There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs." And I think that's it's a great soundbite for architecture as well.
Indeed, Michael. So, Michael, having that entire experience in the IT journey, like when we talk about, the starting point of it, who was the person who actually, suggested that, Michael, I feel you should try for the IT side? Like, who was that person who gave you that drive?
Right. Okay. So if I go right back to how did I end up in IT, it was a really weird decision, actually. It was, as I say, I'd come from a lot of labouring jobs, so forth. And then when I started looking at what I might want to head to, I kind of thought I hadn't turned on a computer or touched a computer. And I thought computers have to stay warm and dry and clean. So if I stick close to computers, then I'm probably going to be okay. And yeah, as it happened, it ended up being a brilliant decision. It connected very well for me.
Fantastic. That's spectacular to know. And I'm really happy that, you're doing really well in what you're doing. Now, Michael, I'm pretty keen to understand this. Like, what was your inspiration and source of drive to, publish your book, Surviving Strategy and Architecture?
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions in there. One is, why did I want to publish a book? And the other is, why was it Surviving Strategy and Architecture, which is here? And people can buy that on Amazon, or if somebody thinks it's really going to help them. I did it to help people. So if people want a copy and for some reason don't want to buy it, that's fine. Just private message me on LinkedIn and I'll send you a voucher for an ebook. I'm not trying to make money off this. So I always wanted to publish a book of some sort, either fiction or non-fiction. I'll let readers decide of which one I've actually done. Is it fiction or non-fiction? It could be in between. A few years ago, I did quite a bit of study and put together some training on platform business models and why they work, solving chicken and egg problems and friction points, and how do platform models actually work? Airbnb, Uber, Amazon, obviously, all sorts of things. So I was very interested in that. And I got very interested in the fact that publishing had turned into a platform business model, particularly with the likes of KDP through Amazon. So when you think about it, publishing has been controlled by power for almost all of human history, either financial power or kings and queens or religious power or other monarchs and dictators. So the fact that we live in an age where we can actually decide we want to publish something ourselves was just so enticing for me. So that's one side of things, because it's a very rare, hopefully LLMs don't kill this whole self-publishing industry. They could, who knows? But it's a very special time to be alive when we can actually publish a book. Anybody in the world can order it. It's remarkable. So I've tried to do everything myself, because in our line of work, if you work in corporate IT, architecture, anything like that, we seldom have full control over anything. We're always trying to get approvals and permission and funding. So I very much did everything I could myself. I did the writing, the editing, cover art, formatting, publishing. Been doing an audio book, which is it's another huge process. Hopefully that'll be out very soon. Everything but the proofreading. So that was a big part of it too. The theme, Surviving Strategy and Architecture, took a while to evolve, and you learn a lot about yourself trying to publish a book. One thing is that trying to hone in on what is the right size niche to aim for takes time. And a lot of the inspiration for it came from a time at that multinational, 23 years there, where we went through a lot of change and a lot of stress and a lot of pain for a lot of architects, solution architects, contractors, enterprise architects. And we had over 100 architects, people coming and going. And I really sort of took on board a coaching role, and I loved that coaching role. At the same time, I'd been doing a lot of Eastern philosophy, a lot of psychology, a lot of philosophy. And I really wanted to bring all those things together to think, well, can I write something that can share some of the lessons and help people, as they're navigating through the journey. And if there's probably one quote in the book there, which I think sums it up well, which is, if we're expecting our toolmen in IT will end once we find the correctly behaving company, then we're going to be setting ourselves up for a very long, painful career. So whatever it is that's going to give us personal satisfaction in IT and in architecture and other such areas, it's not going to be, we found the right company that does everything perfectly. That's not going to happen. So we need to find ways to manage that ourselves. And yeah, that's my inspiration to try and help that. Now, an interesting note on this, I love coaching people. I hope I help people. One thing I have found, although I've got lots of what I think is probably quite good advice in here, you can't coach yourself and you don't take your own advice. So trying to coach yourself is probably like trying to coach your husband or wife, right? You just can't do it. So although I can offer lots of advice, it doesn't mean I'm immune to these things myself. And anyway, I'm still learning lessons every day. Yeah, it's a hard line of work we're in, I think, corporate world.
Fantastic, Michael. Michael, when I see the book cover, when I see the starting cover of your book, I can see some kind of, an Asian symbol associated with that. So what was that, how did you get that idea that, you wanted to use that Asian gateway? I mean, I think, it's prevalent in the Chinese culture or Japanese culture, but how did you get that thought, to put it up
so
there?
it's I think in Japanese culture, it's called Torigate. But you'll find them all throughout Southeast Asia, and they I think potentially the original inspiration did come out of India, through to China, through to Japan, through to all of Southeast Asia. So it's a big symbol in Zen. Which originated in China. It's also a big symbol in Shinto, I think, in Japan as well. But I use the phrase of it being a gateless gate. And there's a book around the gateless gate. It's got lots of what they call koans in there. But basically, a gateless gate is a gate that is hard to get through until you get through it. And then you find there is no effort at all. And it's that gate which is our own torment, if you will. If you think of it, like an easy way to explain it is like riding a bike, right? It's not effort to ride a bike. You just kind of get it once you get it, and you really struggled to do it. But once you get it, you kind of wonder why it was hard. It's not like you've learned anything amazing. And that's that whole concept of the gateless gate. And I think it's a good metaphor for what we try to do in our careers, I think.
Fantastic. That's an amazing description on that, Michael. Now, Michael, as we just ride a little bit deep into your book, I wanted to understand, what is that in-depth analysis that you would like to give about your particular chapter, understanding impermanence?
So, impermanence is a big concept in many cultures. The West tend to want to make everything permanent, but a lot of cultures really value and cherish the impermanent nature of things. I've got some friends and who get really excited about the idea of living longer, living to 150 years, living forever. Wouldn't it be great to live forever? No, it'd be a nightmare. It'd be awful, right? Life is precious because it is impermanent. And if you doubt the impermanence of the world, when you look in the mirror when you're 40, you look in the mirror when you're 50, you get to understand that everything's impermanent. So if I take one example there out of Zen, Srini Suzuki, he used to like to say, it may be so, but it's not always so. And that is a nod to impermanence. But if you look at there's a famous Persian adage, most cultures do have something like this, in Persian adage, this too shall pass. So it basically means if something's good or bad, it won't last forever. Things just naturally pass. You got a toothache, that will pass. You are sitting there for your newborn child, very special moment, but that too will pass, and that's the nature of things. So understanding that's really important. So another way of thinking about impermanence, and it takes a lot to unpack, and this is only my spin on it, but we feel like we're a thing, a noun, a permanent thing. We don't feel like we're an ever-changing process. But again, you look in a mirror over time and you find you're an ever-changing process. Now, where that's useful to understand is if you think of a company. So let's say we think of a bank. Many of us will work at banks. So think of a bank. They might have branches throughout a country. What actually is that bank? It's a collection of people, buildings, paper, cars, processes, computer systems. But the bank is always in a state of flux. People are coming
Yes,
and going, cars are changing, buildings come and go. The
exactly.
computer systems change very slowly, but they do change. The ownership structure of the bank might change. Even the name of the bank, it might have been a mutual and now it's a listed company, and then it gets bought out by a multinational. So what is that company? And it's a concept. It's a living process. It's a happening. It's not a stable, permanent thing. And once you understand that, and particularly if you're working in an area where you have to deal with a lot of strategy and funding and that, it's better to think of the company as being like an ocean wave. What we're trying to do is surf that wave, not swim against it. So that impermanence allows you to understand how do you connect with that impermanence and change with the company and pick your right time. And we'll link back to that later, I think, if we talk about Wu Wei. The Upanishads talk about something, it says, if you understand about one thing made of gold, you understand something about everything made of gold. And that's kind of a linkage through to something like impermanence. If you understand that all things are impermanent, it gives you an understanding of how to interact with anything. You might be in a team that's quite frustrating, but teams come and go. They get restructured. People leave, people arrive. So, yeah, time is on our side in a way.
Indeed. I mean, I really love the way, you talked about the banks and the ever-changing thing of the banks. I feel banks also will come to a situation where, there will be some kind of an integration of AI with the systems that they're using. So, nothing is permanent, as you have just recalled, through talking about the understanding impermanence. Now, Michael, I'm pretty keen to understand this one also because, firstly, when I was just going through your book, I stumbled upon two interesting chapters. One happens to be, the Big Short movie, Abstraction, and the other is the dark side of removing complexity and the applications of it in the IT field. So, Michael, would you like to, just give a walkthrough about it in detail?
Yeah, okay. So I can't get too detailed about either of those two because they're big topics, but I can give you the guts of it. The Big Short movie, and it was from a book, is just wonderful. I'm actually a huge fan of analogies, and which is one thing that a lot of cultures do, is less common in the West, but I think we can do more, particularly a lot of Indigenous cultures do, is they use storytelling to convey messages rather than trying to tell sort of literal sort of messages. And The Big Short has so many great messages in there. So I kind of caught the movie. I'd never heard of the movie. I caught it when I was on an A380 coming back from Sydney. So it was just pure serendipity, pure luck. So much of life is luck. So be open to luck. I just lucky I picked this. I like Brad Pitt, Christian Bale. I watch this. So it's from a book called The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine, from a guy called Michael Lewis, who also did Moneyball, which is also a fantastic movie for different reasons. So it's about the global financial crisis. And so the global financial crisis, we all know about it back in 2008. Wall Street managed to wipe out $1.75 trillion of wealth in the subprime mortgage market. It was an absolute disaster, triggered the global financial crisis. It cost 9 million jobs and 6 million people lost their homes just in the US, and impacted right around the world. Many countries probably got hit worse than the US. New Zealand, we did quite well out of it, actually, as it happened. I wouldn't say we did well, but we were quite well buffered from it. I think at the time we were called a rock star economy. So in this book, Mike Lewis describes it by using a small number of people to tell the story. So the global financial crisis is a massive story, but he just picks a small number of people. That's actually a nice wee trick when you're telling stories too. If you think about things like the Diary of Anne Frank, the reason why the Diary of Anne Frank is so powerful as a story about the Holocaust is that it's hard to tell a story about 6 or 10 million people, but people can connect with a story about one girl. So it brings it down to a small number of people that he talks about. It's a comedy drama, which is useful too, because sometimes our really serious stories, a bit of humour can work quite well to open people up to not take themselves too seriously, because most of the problems we find are of our own creating. So we need to have a bit of humility, and a bit of humour can go a long way. So they bring in a lot of humour in this conversation. And they're bringing a lot of cameos, like people like Celine Gomez explaining about something called a synthetic CDO, which is a technical term for a collection of subprime, or a collection of mortgages, and some of them are subprime, and then people buy these big bundles of mortgages, and they don't really know what's in there. And so they use some great cameos here to explain some very complicated concepts, which, sounds useful for technology because we have lots of complicated concepts. They have things like mortgage-backed securities, these collections of mortgages. They're supposed to be good, and often they put rubbish in them. Collateralized debt obligations, synthetic CDOs. There's all sorts of crazy language there. So they have a guy called Michael Berry, an eccentric character, who was a real character, played by Christian Bale. And this guy digs very deep into and analysing all the thousands and thousands of mortgages within these CDOs. And what turned out was that probably nobody else had ever done that, actually dug into that. They were buying these big debts. So banks would buy these big collections of CDOs and other investors, but nobody was actually going in and looking through the abstraction. So a lot of what we do in our career is dealing at abstract levels, but how many people dive into those abstractions to see detail by detail what's going on? Think of large language models, and there's some hallucinating in that, but so much of the talk is at this really high level, abstract level. How many people are actually going down looking at individual occurrences? So he looked at this and said, something dodgy is going on here, right? There's a lot of really bad subprime mortgages in here. And if too many of these, if the interest rates go up, people won't be able to afford the mortgage. And if too many mortgages default, these CDOs are going to be worthless. And it's just going to be a house of cards. So he went to Goldman Sachs and got them to create a new instrument called a credit default swap, which is actually betting that the bond will fail. They didn't have such a concept, but he took them into it. And this is the way finance works, right? They'll do anything for $1. And so they created this credit default swap. So you could bet against the bond paying out. And so he put a whole lot of money into that. And I won't spoil the drama because it's a great story. It's well worth watching. Front Point Partners, another crowd that they follow, they got a misplaced call by chance, again, serendipity. And so they dug into it too because they wondered what was going on. They were suspicious people. Their example is really good too. So we've got one example of Michael Berry digging into the data to see what's happening at the abstract level. Front Point went the other way. They went to the Gemba, and lean terms, you call it the Gemba. They went down to Florida, which had a very active real estate market, and they looked at who are the people getting these mortgages, and they looked at how many people are overdue and how many people have multiple mortgages, and what are the lapse rates, and how much care is taken before they give people mortgages, and they found out this is a house of cards, even at that detailed end. So yeah, I really love that movie being a great example of looking through the abstraction, checking the detail. Don't assume other people have checked the detail. Go and see what's really happening. I think AI and large language models and agents is a really good example. There's some value there at some stage, but we've got to be really careful to look at what is really happening there. So another analogy they use for these CDOs to explain what gets put into these collection of mortgages is they use the analogy that a chef, get a chef doing a cameo, world famous chef, and he says he's got a whole lot of leftover seafood, and rather than throwing it out and losing money, what he said you can do is put it into a seafood stew, stir it up. Now you've got a whole new product, and you sell that off as a whole new product, where really it was just leftovers. And literally, that is what caused, according to Michael Berry, that was a big part of the global financial crisis, was basically dead fish head mortgages getting thrown into CDOs to make a new product. So yeah, at many levels, this movie is great for us around storytelling, looking through abstractions. Yeah, it's awesome.
Fantastic, Michael. That's a great description, and I really like the way you have put everything together, and it's more like a storytelling from your end as well, I feel.
And removing dark side of removing complexity. Should I talk a wee bit about that?
Yes, absolutely, Michael.
Yeah. So again, I think there's about 280 pages in this book, so I can talk a lot, but I'll try not to. So the dark side of removing complexity. In IT, we talk a lot about removing complexity, and that's good. Generally, we want to remove complexity. I've got a quote that I often use, and that is complexity is resilient and difficult to remove, but it's easy to move complexity. Therefore, when projects and people are saying they're removing complexity, and we've all seen it with projects, often what they're saying is they're moving the complexity onto somebody else. I'm taking the complexity out of my project, or out of my architecture, or out of my system, but I'm pushing it onto a development team, or frontline staff, or a customer. And so that's kind of the dark side of removing complexity. If you actually remove it, that's great. But it is so easy to just move it onto somebody else, not actually remove it.
Yep.
An example, and a great example I had that many years ago on an ERP implementation in mental health sector, putting SAP in. They simplified the project in a few places and some of the mental health units, and it meant that they had to click a few extra buttons and go into some extra screens to fill in some details for patients, and they had to do it a few dozen times a day, and it added a minute here and a minute there. Not a big deal, much better than customizing the package, which of course we don't want to do. But the units were complaining a lot about this. It was causing them a lot of problems. And we thought, well, what's going on? Because it's not that big of a deal. It's a few minutes. And so I went out to the unit to see what was going on. And it was a high dependency mental health unit I went to. And the staff there were in this glass box in the middle of this unit. And it was chaotic, right? There was a couple of staff there, and there were people all over the place doing all sorts of things. And you really felt exposed. And it felt like for me, a computer boy, it was a high risk environment. And they sort of explained, well, if you have to sit there and focus on the screen and not look at what's going on for a minute or two a number of times a day, you're putting people at risk. You're putting yourself at risk. You're putting other patients at risk. This was, so suddenly it's kind of like, oh, we thought we'd remove complexity, but actually we'd moved it rather than removing the complexity. We've moved it into a really dangerous place. So
exactly.
Great example, yeah. A lot of what people talk about now with complexity theory and a few other frameworks is understanding the difference between things that are complicated versus things that are complex. So problem domains and therefore problems that are complicated versus complex. And complicated problems are deterministic. Therefore, you can logically solve it. This is really important as you start getting into AI and large language models and that. So complicated problems are deterministic. You can solve it with logic and reasoning. Whereas complex problems tend to be more multifactored and interrelated with a lot more unknowns. And it's harder to predict what's going to happen. You need to experiment. So think of robotic process automation might be complicated, but it is deterministic versus some of the stuff you might be doing with large language models and agents, which isn't deterministic. And the only way you can really know is to experiment. And my favorite example with that is if you look at something really complicated, an Airbus A380. So an Airbus A380 aircraft is made up of about 4 million individual parts produced by 1,500 companies in 30 countries around the world. The software executes over 100 million lines of code. So an Airbus A380 is incredibly complicated, but we fly on them and we feel safe. Why? Because it's predictable and you can test it and it will behave in a predictable way. So you compare that 4 million parts to a rugby ball. A rugby ball has a lot less than 4 million parts, basically an inner bladder and outer synthetic layer. However, if you ask any rugby player, you cannot rely on the bounce of a rugby ball. So that's a complex, it's presumably it's deterministic in some way, but you're never going to determine what's going to happen with it. Within the context of a game, it's definitely complex, although it's clearly not complicated. So on complexity, they talk about managing the complexity, not trying to solve it. And so I think that's a good one as we start looking at AI and large language models. We've got to look at how do we manage what's happening. And I think a lot of the safeguards we have to put more at the consuming end of output of LLMs, rather than trying to, there's no point tuning them to something deterministic because then they're not an LLM. That's the whole point, right?
Right.
So removing complexity often is about, it's less about removing complexity and more about making things less complicated. And that can be dangerous. So a great example of where that's dangerous would be if you wanted to reduce the number of lines of code in a Airbus A380, you could remove the ground proximity warning system and remove a whole heap of code. We've simplified it. No, you haven't. What you've done is made the pilot's job a lot harder because you put complexity onto the pilot by removing their ground proximity warning system. You've put passengers at risk. So that's an example of, where trying to remove complexity is actually adding complexity. And I'd probably wrap that up by saying for people in IT and architects, look at system thinking. So the godfather of system thinking, Russell Ackoff, really good to have a look at some of his work. More contemporary, people like Donella Meadows. She's got a great book, Thinking in Systems, talks about feedback loops and how systems interwork. I think, so particularly for architects, I think it's really important to be able to understand things at a whole system level. A more complicated system, not necessarily IT system.
Makes sense. That totally, sums up the point for me, Michael. Now, Michael, since I, come from India and I'm a Hindu by origin, so I am very much, fascinated by the way, you have, complemented our holy Bhagavad Gita with that of enterprise architecture. Like, how did you get that thought? I mean, in the first place.
Right. I've, in terms of where I've got to and with my blog and with my book and with my thinking, I've got a blog site, thinkingyay.com or michaeldstark.com. Increasingly, you can find me on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, or not so much on LinkedIn now, I changed it, but certainly on the blog originally before I was trying to peddle my book, which, by the way, is called Surviving Strategy and Architecture, available on Amazon. But before I was doing that, my tagline was philosophy plus psychology plus context plus technology equals enterprise architecture. So really trying to bring together the technology side with philosophy and psychology, as well as, business context and so forth. Really I just did that because I was very interested in philosophy and psychology and Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy increasingly and all sorts of things. So for me, it's like, bring your whole self to your job, whether you're an architect, a tester, developer, whatever. I mean, just bring things that excite you and keep you motivated. I think that's really important. I found that these things fit together really well, which is probably luck. It's been said that philosophy is about what we ought to do, and psychology is about what we actually do. So those two things are kind of quite important to understand. How we make decisions in technology is a lot around psychology. What we ought to do, you can link that through to things like principles quite nicely, and I do in some of my blog posts. One of the authors I quite like, a guy called Brian Van Norden, who links Eastern and Western philosophy. He describes philosophy. He says, we're doing philosophy when we're engaged in a dialogue about problems that are important to us, but we don't agree on the method for solving the problem. It's not that we don't agree on the answer. We don't agree on how to get an answer. Now, that sounds a whole lot like, particularly enterprise architecture, a lot of architecture, but a lot of technology. We would not mature like a building engineer or something like that, or a doctor, or, we haven't matured. We're quite a nascent industry, if you think of it that way. What a lot of people don't know, particularly with East is a whole different thing again, but if you look just at Western philosophy, a lot of people don't know that medicine was part of philosophy, physics was part of philosophy, chemistry, biology, I think biology and chemistry were maybe natural philosophy, mathematics originally was part of philosophy. And as these things matured and got to a point where the method for doing them was more understood, they spun out to their own disciplines. So when you think about it that way, philosophy has a lot to offer architecture and a lot of other areas of technology as well. If you just look at Western philosophy, they talk about 4 main branches of Western philosophy. So there's epistemology, which dives deep, 100 years of diving into how do we know what we know. There's a branch called logic, which is all about reasoning. There's a branch called ethics, what we ought to do, if you've seen trolley problems. And ontology is the 4th branch, which is around classification and structure, which clearly links a whole lot to many aspects of technology. If you look at Eastern philosophy tends to be very holistic, very systems thinking. If you think of Buddhism, Zen, Taoism, Hinduism, all the stuff Sadhguru talks about, he talks about looking at things, all these things look at whole systems. Or if you look at indigenous cultures, Māori, Aboriginal, American Indian, African, they tend to be far more system orientated. And that can only be good, right? Yeah. Oh, and finally, psychology. So if you only get one book to help you after you bought mine, if you do, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a must read. I'd go with the audiobook because he's actually a difficult writer to read. But yeah, he won a Nobel Prize digging into how we make decisions and cognitive bias, etc. So extremely useful for a line of work.
Fantastic. I mean, now that actually, gives me an idea about, how you're able to, link the Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. And yes, in Bhagavad Gita also, there are certain things, where it talks about a lot of different things where, about the psychology, about certain teachings. And I mean, in one of our conversation also, you told that, you follow that particular verse of Bhagavad Gita where, Sri Krishna tells to Arjun that, just focus on your work. Don't, desire for the outcomes. So that actually caught my attention the most.
Yeah. But the Bhagavad Gita, and I've printed out this by my computer desk, and I refer to it a lot, that one passage, but the whole book is fantastic at different times. Actions do not cling to me because I'm not attached to their outcomes. Those that understand this and practice live in peace. And that, I've tried to explain that to an exec, and to their, bonus grounded feet, it just takes your feet right out from under them. It's like, what are you talking about? Of course, outcomes, that's how I get my bonus. It's like, no. Outcomes matter, right? We're not indifferent to what the result is. We care. But we can only perform actions. Actions are the only thing that we can control. What we do, there are other factors there, and we can't control what the outcome is. I remember seeing some thing years ago, well before I'd read the Bhagavad Gita and understood this. But I remember seeing there were business cases there around digitization insurance, where it's like, oh, we're going to invest, so many millions of dollars in this, and we're going to get X percentage growth. And I remember looking at it thinking, you have no idea. You might deliver a beautiful digital solution, but if your competitors are loss leading and trying to buy GWP and that through no fault of your own, you might not grow, but you might do better than you would have had you not done it at all. Like you can't control the outcome. It doesn't matter how well you deliver this thing. You can't control the outcome,
Exactly.
which doesn't mean you're indifferent to the outcome, but it's just, understanding that is important. Yeah.
Totally, Michael. That gives me a clear idea, and I think our audience also will definitely resonate with what you have just told about. Now, you were just mentioning about blog. So now going by your blog, I just wanted to understand, how did you get the thought of linking the worlds of the enterprise architecture, with that of the Eastern philosophy, like Wu Wei, the effortless action for. I'll just ask the question again. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll ask the question again. I really messed it out. So sorry for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just a minute. I am a little bit, on that. Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, so now, you were just talking about your blog, Michael, all the way. So Michael, I'm pretty much keen to understand, what gave you the thought of, linking the enterprise architecture with philosophy, and can you give an insight analysis on the Wu Wei, which is the effortless action for enterprise architecture?
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time reading very old books, very old texts. Obviously, I can't read Sanskrit or Pali, so I have interpretations of things like the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita and stuff like that. Analects of Confucius, Dao De Chang from Lhasa, all these sorts of things. And as you start reading through that, Zhuangzi, I love Zhuangzi's work. As you start reading through these things, you start to realize, apart from a few superficial differences, not a lot has changed. This thing I'm reading here is 2,000 years old, and once you get over a little bit of language difference and stuff, we're doing what we've always done, really. So Wu Wei really resonated quite strongly with me. So often as architects or technologists, strategists, we get very frustrated that our strategies and roadmaps, they don't get approved, they don't get funding. So we're trying to push this through, and maybe we've got how to push something through. If you look at like corporate strategies, you see that they'll have all of these different goals for these different execs, but they don't necessarily all line up. Like, one person's got to save money, the other person's got to grow, and the other person's got to do this and that. You think, well, do all these things together even work? Can all of this even happen? So we're conditioned to believe, particularly sort of in Western companies, and that's probably pervaded, I think, many countries, countries around the world, many cultures. I don't know, but I've seen that just willpower and brute force is the way to force things through. And Wu Wei is saying, well, that's not necessarily the best way to do it. So if you look at particularly architecture, enterprise architects or architectures overall, we're very much being prone to the charge that we're idealistic and unrealistic about things. We tend to blame the company for not investing. You didn't decommission these systems, you didn't invest in this technology, and often we're seen as being out of touch with the company because they're looking at the commercial reality here and saying, well, we can't invest in everything. So we end up sort of becoming salespeople rather than trusted advisors. I think often, there's this, we talk about the business and technology. I mean, in most companies, it's the same thing, right? These days, businesses just have technology pervasive everywhere, and technologists are only there to support the business. There shouldn't be a divide. So Wu Wei came out of the Dao De Chang, probably not exclusively, but it is a big part of the influence, as well as another guy called Zhuangzi. So Lhasa, who wrote the Dao De Chang about 2,500 years ago, a great line he's got there. He says, a good traveller has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving, which is weird, but it's means that you're open to where things might go. So Wu Wei literally means non-action or non-doing. And the easiest way to understand it that we can all connect with is martial arts. So we kind of know with martial arts, the central theme is that you go with the energy and redirect the energy, something like judo. It's not necessarily a toe-to-toe slugfest, although the UFC can be. But a lot of what you're trying to do is go with the energy of your opponent and use that against them. and it might not necessarily be your opponent in business world. So Wu Wei is about that. It's related to flow and effortless flow, which is really big in sporting teams. When you talk about the team being in the zone, it's getting in that space where you've really flown with action. So Laza talks a lot about, and Bruce Lee used to as well, talks about water. So water is soft and yielding, yet it can erode hard rock over time. So it's about having that understanding of what you can achieve over time, and being able to notice through careful attention and respond to the true demands of the situation, being able to listen to when is the right time to do a particular action, and trying to push actions that will work. So it's not necessarily about making anything you want to do work. It's much about trying to do the right things where it's the right time and situation for it to work. It's a really big part of it. So pursue an action when conditions are right for those actions. So again, sort of back to what we were talking about with company before, it's about getting a feel for the energy and flow of a company. And, I'd spend a lot of time reading through financial reports and other things, and you can kind of get a feel for what is the company interested in? Are they in a cost out kind of zone where those stories work better? Are they in a risk? Are they in a regulatory pressure zone? Are they in a growth zone? Trying to understand where the company's at and align what you want to achieve to where the energy is flowing in the company. So an example might be, security's always tough. I'm not a security guy, but let's say you want to move to zero trust type environment or blah, 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 and you want to make some changes and you need a big investment around security and you need people to do things. And it's always hard to push that. Well, if you get yourself organized and pick the right timing, let's say you're in a financial institute, and then let's say, somewhere else within your industry, there's a high profile data breach, the boards will come to you, right? The board will be going to the CEO. Oh, what are we doing in this space and customer data and this other company, and that's the time to push. You need to be prepared. You need to pay attention. But you push then and say, well, we've got this. Boom. That's Wu Wei. Can I tell you a quick story?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So this guy will come up again, I'm sure, Richard Rumelt. So Richard Rumelt, my favorite strategist, he was talking to Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs, back in the days, I think it was 1988, back when Steve Jobs went back to Apple to save Apple. So back before the iPhone and iPad and iPod and all this sort of stuff. So back when they were really struggling and Microsoft were crushing them. And he's got this quote here. He says, in the summer of 1988, I got an opportunity to talk to Steve Jobs again. I said, Steve, this turnaround at Apple, it's been impressive, but everything we know about the PC business says that Apple cannot really push beyond a small niche position. The network effects are just too strong for the Wintel standard, for Microsoft and Intel and all them. So what are you trying to do in the long term? What's the strategy? And Steve didn't try to attack Richard's argument. He didn't agree with it either. He just smiled and he said, I'm going to wait the next big thing. That next big thing was the iPad sort of platform, iPhone, iPad. He got himself in the right position, got the right people, paid attention to these forces coming together, mobile technology, wrist chips, GPS, all these other things, internet, and he picked the right time for the right thing. Apple this week just went to $4 trillion US valuation this week, so the strategy worked. But that was Wu Wei. That was paying attention, getting your timing right, going with the energy.
Fantastic, Michael. So, Michael, in your experience, what is it like for people, combining the world of, let's say the strategy and the architecture together?
So I guess combining strategy and architecture depends a lot what you mean by those two things. So for me, they're kind of like a marriage, strategy and architecture. They just go together like a marriage. Of course, like any marriage, that doesn't necessarily mean it's smooth sailing either. I'll just assume that we're pretty cool with architecture, although there's lots of confusion around it. But the bigger confusion is probably on the strategy side. So we all kind of know what strategy means until we have to clearly explain it. So certainly for me, good technology strategy, and I've done some really bad technology strategy over the years, and luckily I've been exposed to some really awesome people that have helped me, and I feel like I've got a lot better. But technology strategy needs to be tightly aligned to corporate strategy. These days, really, it needs to be part of corporate strategy, co-constructed, I think, is the way to go. It's hard to do, right? Because you've got to build a lot of trust with the business and you've got to understand their language. Now, I absolutely love this book by Richard Rumelt. McKinsey article put me onto it. He's also got the crux, but this guy, Richard Rumelt, is just amazing, right? He's brutal on strategy and what gets called strategy. He is uncompromising master of strategy. And they call him the strategist, the strategy strategist. And he's got great sound bites like, many bad strategies are just statements of desire rather than plans to overcome obstacles. So, and at the core of it, he says, strategy is about focus. And the most complex organizations do not focus their resources. Instead, they'll go away and pursue multiple different goals at once, not concentrating enough energy on any one of those goals to really break through with them. So a bad strategy, often, outcomes are put forward as being your strategy. What's your strategy? What's World Cup for rugby, New Zealand, France, whoever. What's your strategy? Our strategy is to win the World Cup. Well, yeah, but how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to go to the final and win the final. Right.
Yes.
How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to do that because we're going to score more points. Right. So that's another way of saying to win the game. Like, how are you going to do that? Right. What are you going to do? What are you going to trade off? Where are you going to put your forces? That's strategy. So yeah, he's awesome. In terms of strategy, he talks about the hallmark of bad strategy. And I used to do a lot of this, fluffy language. Probably fluff is the number one cause of a bad strategy. Not identifying the key crux of the problem to solve will lead you to a bad strategy. And goals stated as strategy, saying the outcome, saying that's my strategy, that's not a strategy. How are you going to get there? So it's about that focus. And it's something that technology needs to understand. If you look at business leaders, the C-suite and boards, they have far more good ideas, most of the time, far more good ideas than they can ever possibly execute. I reckon about 4-to-1 business cases to what your average sort of investment envelope is, let alone your ability to execute it. So 3 out of 4 good ideas they can't do. If they try to do them all, they'll probably do none of them. So we need to remember that, we need to remember not only do we need to have a good idea, it's got to be better than 3 of the 4 other ideas. So something like tuning off a legacy. Why aren't they investing in tuning off this legacy system? Why aren't they investing in upgrading this database? It might be a great idea. It might even have positive net present value on the business case, but it's got to be better than the other opportunities. That's what it's about.
Exactly, Michael. Yeah. Now, Michael, asking you as an individual, what is that mission of yours as an enterprise architect for your company, Tower Insurance, and IT industry as a whole, setting that complete positive pulse, throughout?
Yeah, so part of that links back to my book as well. I've got another book in mind, which hopefully I can get onto if I ever get the Sword book out the way. Yep. But also, I love the company I'm at. It's a great sized company, Tower Insurance. It's New Zealand's only sort of New Zealand owned general insurance company. Most of them are owned by Australians, which is fine. We need the capital, but I want to work for a New Zealand Kiwi company. It's a nice size. It's about 1,000 odd people, so we've got enough money to do things. But it's not so big that you can't get anything done. The place I was before was about 15,000 people, 3,000 people in technology. No good decisions happen quickly. if you've got that many people, right? So I'm really trying to use all of my experiences to really help town insurance win. That's my goal. Insurance is very important, becoming more important all the time to keep affordable insurance for people to protect their assets. And yeah, I really want town to win. So my LinkedIn sort of byline is lean enterprise architect. So I'm big on lean thinking, strategist, author, system thinker. I like system thinking, love coaching when I get a chance, love presenting, and it's always going to be an Eastern philosophy advocate. So I kind of blend those things in. I'm probably realistically keen to nudge enterprise architecture away from the TOGAF defined identity. TOGAF is good, it's been very useful, and it's still got some good parts to it, but I think EA is a lot more than that.
Yep.
It's about deeply understanding the business, the drivers of the business, motivation of the business, getting deep in the narrative style of different stakeholders, working out what their tripwire words are, what words will unlock doors for them, and they change all the time. I've got a lot of interest in how decisions are made. So going back to that Daniel Kahneman sort of behavioral psychology, how do companies go about making decisions and how can we help that? So some of the tools from the management consulting world can be very useful, like ECQA, MISI, Minto Pyramids. There's tools people can look up that allowed for structured decision making.
Yeah.
One of the smartest things, which I really enjoy trying to do, that a vendor from SAS analytics company, once told me, was when you're talking to your stakeholders, it's not what you can tell them, it's what they can tell to their stakeholders. So she talked about it as being repeatable narratives. You need to be able to tell your story in a way that that person can tell the next person and the next person. And what is absolutely wonderful is if you hear that narrative coming back to you through another channel and you don't try and own it, you just sort of think, wow, that's cool. So a lot of it, trying to get change to happen, is about telling a story that people can tell to their execs and other execs. And yeah, so I love that side of it. Business cases, helping people develop really good business cases so they can get prioritized or not. It's not up to us whether or not they get prioritized, but give them the best case they can. Yeah, complex operating models, preserving optionality. A lot of what architecture is about. Gregor Hope talks about it. Preserving optionality, I think, is a really big thing we want to do. Allow the business to change your mind in the future. If we can help architect systems that allow them to change your mind, that's really useful. Risk management's become big. Obviously, AI is going to make that even bigger. Yeah, all that sort of thing. But if you're anywhere near enterprise architecture strategy, anything like that, you've got to dig deep into annual reports, dig into the P&L, understand the real drivers of the business. Generally, I think most companies have one of two drivers. It's either the P&L, profit and loss. If it doesn't hit that, there better be risk and compliance. That there's other things that might motivate them, but generally most money goes towards things that help the P&L or things that are about risk and compliance. That's really, I think, what I see there.
Surely, Michael. Now, Michael, do you have any plans of, writing a sequel for your book, let's say, or do you have any plans of, covering all those philosophies that you didn't get a chance of, divulging more into?
It's interesting. I mean, I'm still diving into new philosophies all the time. I probably wouldn't write a follow-up to this book. I said a lot in here, a lot of what I wanted to say, which, if you self-publish, you can say what you want to say. I put a lot of effort into trying to make it a very professional publication, which I think I have, and the feedback as I have. So I probably wouldn't do a follow-up for that. I thought about trying to broaden it so it's more applicable, because I niched right down to strategy and architecture, because you kind of need to do that to get some cut through. And I was thinking about, could I broaden it a wee bit? But I'll probably pivot into something more around sort of lean thinking type applied to architecture, something that would help architecture mature but I definitely don't want to be one of those people that suggests another framework. I
I know.
don't want to do that, right?
I know. Everything has to come from inside. If you have that calling, definitely you enjoy the work the most. And I think, that's what I can, try to hear from your words, and which is really, really, I support you for that.
Yeah, well, it allows you to, if you write a book or blog posts, blogging is really good too. It allows you to have to get clear on your thoughts and your key
Yeah.
tenets and your key beliefs. So it can be really useful to make you a better architect. So, I think everything I've done hopefully makes me more useful to companies as well. Not because I want a reward, but just because I want to be good at what I do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't get that so much just because I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn, reach out. I love talking to people. They're much smaller sound bites, so it's hard to have the same quality of thought in a post that's going to go anywhere on LinkedIn. If you do a big post with well matured thinking, people don't read it, right? Yeah, there's got to be trendy sound bites, and yeah.
100%. That's absolutely true. Now, Michael, what is your take on the diversity of thought when it comes to the IT industry?
Yeah, so it's one of my hobby horses. Obviously, with the fact that I sort of focus a lot on Eastern philosophy and other things. Some of the other things that come into there is I'm definitely a card-carrying introvert, and so that is also a factor. So diversity is very important, right, for a number of different reasons. And I look at diversity outside the whole discussion around DEI type topics. And most countries have some form of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and these are good things, but they're hot topics, and I keep out of that. So diversity is good because it's richness of experience. By bringing in people with different backgrounds and beliefs and cultures, that's going to make the company stronger and better. Also, it's the fair and right thing to do, to treat people fairly and equitably, and just bringing in a variation of thinking, different ways of thinking, and that's really probably the one that I focus more on. So in terms of diversity, I take quite a broad view. I think about it in terms of gender, ethnicity, race, age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, geography, socioeconomics, temperament, neurodiversity, and more. So, I think of the full range there. And, I do worry that sometimes companies are stifling or not leveraging to the extent they could the new ways of thinking. I think sometimes they rely a little bit too much on some kind of trickle-down impact on thinking. Like if we get in a broad range of people, then they, we'll just magically think differently. So I think what we do, and I know you're from India, and I have a lot of wonderful colleagues from India over the years, and I notice it with India as well because I have spent a lot of time on philosophies from India, and I also notice that a lot of people, particularly people that come through IT and have done a lot of higher education, quite a few don't have that strong connection, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that, colonialism and stuff, and these are complicated topics, but they are what they are. So sometimes what I think we find is we bring in a lot of diversity into companies, but people soon learn they need to adhere to the old unwritten rules of the game. So we have new people, but the same game, and I think we should change the game, right? And we can do things a bit differently. So it's really important for everybody to bring their full self and including their culture, their however they are in terms of their emotional aptitude, their spiritual selves, their storytelling approaches and narrative styles from, if they come from a indigenous culture or any culture, you all come from somewhere. Bring out logical and scientific ways of thinking. That's probably very dominant now, but we don't want to throw that away. That's still good. So bring in some non-dualistic and holistic ways of thinking, because they're very important too with some of the challenges that face us. So for me, diversity of thinking is not just about what you think, but how you think. So, and that's a bit that I think people struggle the most with is, like you'll hear people saying, paraphrasing here or making it up, people might say something like, you can bring new ideas, that's fine, you can bring in your new ways of doing things, as long as they're logically sound and backed up with data and evidence. Well, you know what? That's not the only way of thinking and reasoning, data and evidence. There's other ways of looking at solving problems. It's not a bad way, but it's not the only way.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, we look at the rich wisdom. I spent a lot of time, obviously, in Eastern philosophy as well as Western philosophies. So philosophies from India, China, Japan, lots of other places through Asia. I haven't spent as much time on an indigenous sort of philosophy or ways of thinking. Some exposure being in New Zealand to Māori ways of looking at the world, and there's a lot of overlap there with perhaps other holistic type cultures. African, I haven't spent time on that, but there's or Aboriginal in Australia. So I think there's a lot of cultures that could add value to our companies, and if we embrace different ways of looking at the world and thinking. And part of that is also, you're inevitably going to collide with colonialism and some of the impacts of that. So, if you think of colonialism in India, for example, the British very deliberately sort of tried to undermine and downplay a lot of Eastern philosophies, probably not because they didn't see value in them, probably because they saw huge value in them, which probably worried them, I suspect. And so how do we sort of change our way of thinking about things? And I on LinkedIn, I use Nietzsche as my alter ego in the images for LinkedIn. And he's got this great quote. He says, all things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power, not of truth. And that is correct. And so it's, rebalancing that power type thing. The other big one in terms of diversity, as I say, it's not just sort of ethnicity in that for me. I think also emotional diversity is really important too. So in modern companies, they talk a lot about EQ, emotional intelligence, and we love to measure things and optimize it. But emotional intelligence isn't a bad thing, but we've got to be careful, right? Like you look at a lot of great leaders, Winston Churchill, Malcolm X, Friedrich Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, Bezos, definitely Musk. These people contributed hugely to the world, but these weren't people of high EQ in all probability. So it's not only people of high EQ that contribute. There's nothing wrong with being highly introverted, and Western companies are supposed to be vibrant and bubbly, and you're supposed to like, team planning and stand-ups and open environments and all these things. But a lot of people don't. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with neuroticism. So people are more or less neurotic. That neurotic people can have huge value. Neuroticism sort of got pushed down because the original thinkers, Jung and Freud, the original sort of psychologists in that space, they sort of viewed neuroticism as a problem. But it's just a normal human trait. Some people more, some people less. It's not supposed to be a bad thing.
Yep.
So yeah, I think diversity is also looking at EQ. I'm very suspicious of that, because like we've survived as a species, and my question is, how did we survive through the hunter-gatherer phase of humanity,
right,
without the Myers-Briggs type indicator? To tell us which ones should go out and find new resources.
Yep.
We've survived quite well without EQ and Myers-Briggs and all these things. So I wouldn't say they're not useful, but yeah, people come in all different shapes and sizes. Interestingly, World Economic Forum sort of study found that in terms of EQ, it's actually a bell curve. The individual contributors at one end of the bell curve, CEOs at the other end. The people with the highest EQ tend to be in middle management. Supervisors tend to have high EQ. CEOs tend to have the lowest EQ on average.
Yep,
So it's probably not that big of a problem.
it is. It is. That is completely
And so,
understandable, Michael. Yeah, you were saying?
yeah, uh, I, I, I love Sadhguru, listen to a lot of his stuff. Also love Alan Watts. Alan Watts sort of got me into Eastern philosophy. He's a great guy. I
Yep.
listen to, he's dead now, but he's fantastic. He had a great saying. He would say, did you ever see a cloud that was misshapen? Or one that questioned itself about how it was? No, clouds are cloud shaped. So are people. There's no right or wrong shape, people. There's no right or wrong way to be as a person. Just be
Yes,
yourself.
yes. It is what it
Yeah.
is. Yep. So, I mean, offline, we were just having this conversation, that you are really fascinated by Sadhguru and you really follow a lot of his stories and his teachings. So, is there any interesting anecdote or let's say a story that you have to, that you would like to, share about?
Yeah. So if people haven't come across Sadhguru, look him up. Right. He's a very interesting character. He's been invited to Harvard and Princeton and different UN forums, and he gets invited a lot to talk to AI forums and that as well, because he's got an interesting perspective. So he brings in a very sort of yoga Eastern type way of looking at it, very holistic. But he's just wonderfully entertaining guy. He really is. But one story I love from him, which I think is a good way to sum up my book, perhaps. So he talks about a middle-aged man who finishes a long week of work and heads home at the end of another 13-hour day at the end of the week. It was 7:30 p.m. when he leaves for home. And his wife rule was he had to be home by 8 p.m. But he thinks half an hour, put time for a quick drink at the club. So he goes to the club, quick drink, had a drink, another drink. He looks at his watch, it's 2 a.m. He says, oh, what am I going to do here, right? Like, better get home for dinner. I'm in trouble. So he stumbles his way home, and that's a whole palaver. And Sadhguru's got a great way of describing that. On his way home, just as he gets to his house, he falls into a rose bush and scratches his face, and he's a mess. And he crawls up the stairs, makes it into the bathroom, and he looks in the bathroom mirror. No, his face is a mess. He's got all these cuts and blood and everything. He thinks, what am I going to do here? So he pulls out the thorns out from his nose and his cheek and everything. He's still bleeding.
Oh my God.
So he puts some plasters on to cover up to try and make himself look a bit better. And then he slips into bed, and so he doesn't wake his wife. And about 6 a.m. in the morning, suddenly wakes up because his wife throws a bucket of cold water over him. And he hates that, right? He hates it. Every Saturday morning, she does the same thing. And she yells, "You fool!" And she drags him out of bed, drags him into the bathroom. Look, points at the mirror. And the mirror is covered in plasters. The plasters that he was putting on his face, he put on the mirror. And I love that story, right? Because that's us often. We stumble through life as if we were drunk. We see problems with us and we try to fix the world, and mostly we can't control the world. We just get to control how we feel about it. It's kind of like a Stoic viewpoint too. Everyone blames the world, but sometimes we have to realize that, we have to play our side of the game. We have to find our own path, and we have to adjust how we think, right? There's no point blaming your company for what they do or don't do, or what they do or don't fund. Companies are companies, the world's the world. We just need to adjust ourselves as best we can. I give that advice, but I'm really bad at taking it. So we all are.
Exactly, Michael. So, Michael, before we actually, conclude our podcast session, let's take a pretty lighter route now. All this while, we're talking about about enterprise architecture, about your book, then about, how you're able to collide the Western philosophies and, the teachings of Eastern philosophy. Now, we're not going to go anything more technical or, more anything towards the strategy side. We'll be talking about, your likes and interests in the form of a rapid fire round with quick questions. So, I'll start the rapid fire round. And the first question to you, Michael, if you're ready.
Yeah, I can't guarantee it'll be rapid. I'm an enterprise architect and philosophy fan, but let's go.
Perfect. So the first question to you, Michael. So, Michael, what is your favorite sports team?
New Orleans Saints. So I like American football. I got addicted to that. And it's a game that reminds me a lot of cricket because it's got a lot of individual skill, a lot of tactics, a lot of strategy. Weird thing to say, but yeah, I love cricket too.
Yeah. Perfect. So coming to your favorite NFL team, who is that favorite player that you like the most and you feel that, he's following the right strategy, to make the best out of it?
Oh, their quarterback used to be a guy called Drew Brees, and I really used to like him. So he had a bad shoulder injury, but fought back, and he ended up breaking many NFL records. He won a Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints. He was a big part of the city rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina.
Okay.
So yeah, I'd have it. But then he ended up, most of his records got overtaken by some guy called Tom Brady. But what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yes. Tom Brady, the very famous name in NFL.
Yeah, and Tom Brady. Do you know the amazing thing about Tom Brady?
Yeah. Oh, what's
So,
that?
well, in the almost the only way to get through into the NFL is to get drafted from college. So
Okay.
in the draft, they have 200 players that get drafted each year, similar to the IPL draft, but it's from college. He got picked second to last, 198th out of 200 people.
Oh my
He
God.
very nearly, every team passed on him 7 times. Tom Brady, the most amazing quarterback of all time. And yeah, he just developed when he got an opportunity, and he used that to inspire him in every single game. Every single one of the 32 teams passed on him 7 times.
Fantastic. I mean, that's very inspirational. I mean, Tom Brady fans, if they're hearing this, they'll definitely, love this particular piece of information that they're hearing for sure.
They'll know that if they're a fan of his. Yeah.
There might be certain people, who love Tom Brady, but let's see, but I am a fan of Tom Brady, and definitely I'm actually blown hearing this.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. And now, Michael, now if I would just like to ask you, like, what is that Indian restaurant that you always, like to go in Christchurch in New Zealand?
Okay, so I was there last night. I'm back there again on Saturday night. Samara's. I love to go to an Indian restaurant called Samara's. It's about 5 minutes from my house. Sid and Karina are the owners of it, and their daughter is called Samara, and that's who it's named after. They've got a son now too, and they're just wonderful. The food is beautiful, first off, but they're just wonderful people. Right? They give us a hug when we get in there, and they know everybody, and they know your orders, and they chat, and it's just a different experience, right? It's a it's a family. You kind of get that experience through Indian food. So I'd love to go to India and try some of the food. Yeah.
You should come to India, and you should, try the authentic food here. You'll just be spellbound by the variety that, the Indian food has with different, with respect to different states. And trust me, you'll just love it.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this restaurant that you just mentioned about, I believe if I'm getting the name right, Samara's. So where do these, this family comes from? Do they come from the north of India? Like, any idea on that?
Yeah, I have talked to them about that. It is up north in one of the colder areas in winter. So yeah, I'm not too sure beyond that, but it is definitely
I know the place.
Up north.
I know the place. It's called Kashmir, or probably it might be Himachal Pradesh, which is in the northmost.
I don't think it's quite as far as Kashmir, but it's up in that direction. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty interesting to know. Now, I'll ask you. I'll give you 2 choices now. What is the thing that you prefer the most? Is it mountains or is it beaches?
Mountains. You gotta love mountains. So we've got wonderful mountains in New Zealand. And we've got one called Aoraki, which in English is called Mount Cook, and Māori name is Aoraki. I love going there in winter time. You go there in winter, it's the highest mountain in New Zealand. You go there in winter time when it's freezing cold, and you can feel the mountain, right? You can just feel this presence next to you. It's yeah, love it. I'm not a beach bunny.
For me, it's the reverse. I prefer beaches most, and I really like mountains also. It's not like I don't like mountains, but I like mountains. But the first thing that stands out to me is beaches.
Yeah. Well, the beaches, particularly around Christchurch, the beaches aren't very nice. So.
I get it. I
In
know
fact,
where you're coming
put
from.
it this way, the expensive real estate in Christchurch is by the airport, far away from the beach. The beach is sort of among the cheapest real estate,
Mhm.
and by the airport is the more expensive real estate. So go figure.
100%. That completely, cracks the point. Now, since you're based in New Zealand, who is that famous, New Zealand pop star that the world needs to be aware of?
Famous New Zealand pop star.
Or a
Well,
musical
obviously,
artist? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, obviously, Lord has done very well for herself. So yeah, I really like her. She's fantastic. Um, there was a group years ago called Split Ends. I really liked their music. I thought they were awesome. Back when I was young, they were growing up, and some of them sort of went and formed Crowded House. Um, so yeah, they're another great band. But yeah, lots of good bands in New Zealand.
Fantastic. Now, the final question to you, what was the last movie that you have watched?
Do, 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 do. That's a good question. What was the last movie that I watched? I think I rewatched World War Z. I love a good horror movie, and that was probably the last one I watched. So yeah.
Okay. All right. That's a good choice. That's a very interesting choice because I myself don't watch any horror movies. So I felt, yeah, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah, I look, there's lots of fantastic movies out there. You know, one of my all-time favorites would probably still be Schindler's List. You know,
Yeah.
that's just such a powerful movie. But there's lots of good movies.
Indeed, for sure, Michael. So, Michael, thank you so much again for taking time from your busy schedule and being part of my podcast initiative. Your support really means a lot to me. And Michael, throughout our conversation, the way you were, mix, let's say, talking about different philosophies, the way you were linking each one actually just was like, I blew my mind. And then again, you came back, talking about enterprise architecture. So you just had a great, balance of that, in which I really feel that, I need to draw inspiration from for sure. And you know, I mean, this is the very first time in my podcast initiative that I've seen so much diversity when it comes to the talks of Eastern philosophies, technology, and the real cases of that. So that was pretty spectacular, and just enjoyed everything what you've just talked about.
Oh, thank you for that. It's very kind. Thank you. And it's I mean, just we all just need to bring our true selves to work, whatever that is, whatever inspires us, whatever gives us energy. We should just bring that. For me, it happens to be philosophy, but psychology and other things. I'm a card-carrying introvert, but
Yeah,
if it's something else, that's cool too. And can I give you one more short quote from Sadhguru?
100%. Yeah.
This one I heard on a podcast. I wrote it down because it was just so good. What is a bad day? There's never a bad day in the universe. Only somebody that's having a bad time. Hello? So it's a beautiful day already. Even if you and me did not exist, it is still a beautiful day, isn't it? But it
Yeah.
is our fortune that we are here. And
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. I still have many bad days. So yeah, knowing these
Lucky
things
you.
doesn't mean you can do it, right? And it's and that's a weird thing, right? With I think people get very confused. I'm not a religious person. I don't consider myself a religious person. I've gone to a lot of philosophies. But as you start diving into it, you start seeing for a lot of cultures, like there's no bright line between philosophy, psychology, religion, health, economics. You know, all these things they're just all together. If you look at Hinduism and you look at other things, they're very big tents. There's no, to say, well, don't bring the religious aspect means, well, then you're not bringing this philosophy and psychology and all this other richness, right? They're
Yeah. Yeah.
indistinguishable. It's
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's really important that we feel comfortable to bring all of that
Yes.
respectfully. Yeah.
Absolutely, Michael. That's a very priceless statement that you have told. So, Michael, on this note, we will, we'll just, we'll just conclude our podcast session. So, listeners, on this note, this is your host, Dr. Lavluri, signing off. We will be back with another podcast episode with another eminent industry leader very soon. Till then, keep listening. Stay tuned. Goodbye. Thank you, and au revoir and kia ora.